Try this? Okay, back in business. Here we go. Thanks for bearing with us. All right, so as I was saying, we're going to start with the season history up to now. This graph shows snowfall. It's one of the, I think, Gem Pass snowtail sites, but it's a pretty good indication of when the snow is happening and when it's not. It varies greatly over our whole range, which covers Bishop Creek down here up to Virginia Lakes to the north. So as you can see, there's these little blips right up here in October. A little bit of snowfall there, about 10 inches, and then another 5 inches here. And then these big flat areas and descending areas is dry periods. So you had these two little snowfalls in October and just sat there. And then we had this pretty decent snowfall right at the end of October, where we had almost 2.5 feet of snow. And everyone got really excited. They're like, whoa, this is a great start. And it was cool to see. It was a good snow. We could slide around a little bit. But at the same time, I was thinking in the back of my head, like, what's this going to mean later down the road? Is this going to come back and bite us in the butt? And it did. So we had this dry period up until middle of November, and we had another little blip, another 10 inches or so of snow, and then a really long dry period. And that's what really just led to faceting of the snowpack. Basically, what the snow on the ground was just sitting there, getting crystallized and sugary. The grains were growing, and that stuff doesn't bond well. So basically, it's just sitting there, and it's no big deal as it sits there. But once we get a big load on top, it acts as a really kind of terrifying weak layer. So then we get into December, and then December we had the biggest December that I can remember in a long, long time. Lots of snow, and you can see. Started off with a small storm, then a 40-inch storm, and then we had a little bit of a break for less than a week, and then a 45-inch storm that lasted several days. So these big storms piled up on top of this weak sugary layer, and that was what we were really worried about for a while. You can see this other graph under here, this daily danger ratings. These correlate to the days here. We started issuing avalanche forecasts on December 9th. So level 3 is considerable, level 2 is moderate, level 1 is low, and then up at 4 is high. So you can see that these high danger levels correlate with these big snowfall events. And then typically after the big snowfall events, avalanche danger will drop as things settle, but winds can also pick up and then raise avalanche danger or keep it elevated as well. We had a lot of that. We had tremendous winds in December as well. So here's after that first storm, this is, I'll play this. This is an observation that I made of the field.
That conversation since the Avalanche Center is December 15th. We're up here on Peak Bardini, to the top of the old growth at 9,700 feet. That's that 31-degree slope. Here's the whole snowpack here. We've got this layer of new snow from the past storm. We've got the faster from the news. Our extended column test possibilities are at medium force. That would take too much for the whole column to collapse there.
Sorry, the volume on that was a bit soft, but I think you guys could see the column collapsing pretty easily after just going up with the saw just a very little bit. And you can see all those loose facets at the bottom. So that's what we were really worried about middle of December as those big storms are coming in. You can see the snow pit on the right there. This is basically hardnesses. So what we like to see is these soft layers, these narrow columns at the top, and then thicker ones at the bottom, meaning there's less dense snow on the top and then more dense snow at the bottom. But then we have these layers down low, these facets that we had that developed from the October and November storm. And that was what we were worrying about. That's what that test failed on. So, here's another, Chris Engelhardt, another one of our forecasters. He's going to talk a little bit about how distribution across the slope can be affected by rocks and things like that.
And just what I wanted to really highlight is a basic thing that seasoned mountaineers will know, but it's the hollow nature of like how you can have this big, robust slab, and then where it's laying over big rocks, you can have these big hollow cavities, and then as well, the snow faceting and becoming looser around these hollow points where there's more heat and warmth from the earth coming up from ground level. So just want to point that out, that this can where a trigger point can be, or a weak point when we're dealing with these persistent slab issues of having a robust, pretty beefy slab from that big storm last week over the looser faceted snow, combined with maybe a potential weak spot, cavities and whatnot. So steep rollovers over rocky terrain where there's more cavities down. And just what I wanted to really highlight.
Okay. All right. So he was basically talking about how there's areas of the slope that are more dangerous than others. Basically areas that are rocky and steep, or on the edges of the slope where wind stretch and more shallow, that could be more dangerous to trigger an avalanche at. Where it's thick and a nice smooth grassy slope might not be so dangerous as a one with boulders, and that's steep where that basically cavity core or that the facets occur greater. Here's another video.
All right, this is Josh Feinberg here from Eastern State Avalanche Center on December 28th. Down here in the big old snow field, top of Feinberg, about 9,700 feet on the northern aspect. Yeah, you can see the snow down here. It's almost 270 centimeters. The top of this probe is 285 centimeters. So lots of snow. The goal here is to check out these stable facets that we've been knowing about. They're very down here. That's still obvious here. We've got a deep top test isolated. Basically, we have 15 centimeters measured from the back of the snow column of snow left on top of this potential weak layer. So let's tap and see what happens here. And exhale. And these fairly defined facets. Got this layer here. At least it should be still. Yeah, fifth plus. On top of a little bit of a melt freeze process degrading. Passing away on top of more facets that are over your 4-finger plus. And then, yeah, basically the stabilized layer, it's about 20 centimeters above the ground, so 0 to 20 to stabilize, and you've got 20 to 55 of this mixture of decomposing crusts and basal facets. And you have this Tesla show fairly cleanly, but with hard force. So it would take a hell of a lot for a steer or any kind of steam powered vehicle or snowmobile, no more snowboarder to trigger this layer. This deep, fairly down in the snow. But if there's potentially somewhere that's wind stripped and there's a shallow point in the snowpack where it really does get really shallow, and the human did hit that spot, that's what we're worried about. That could potentially trigger a failure across the beach. So probably getting very unlikely at this point, given this amount of snow on top. But still, we had some huge avalanches released on Mammoth Mountain by Ski Patrol a couple days ago that did fell down to these basal facets with some artillery explosives. So that was quite a force. But we'll see. Hopefully our confidence will gain soon and we can stop thinking about this. But for now, it's still on our radar.
So that was towards the end of December. That was a big snowpack on top of those layers, and we were keeping that as a problem, that persistent slab problem, worrying about those weak layers under there until they settled some more. But before I go on to the rest of the season, I want to touch on what Mammoth Mountain saw up on Mammoth Mountain. the ski patrol avalanche control work using explosives and the howitzer. We had a lot of big slides up there. Climax, for those of you who are familiar with that, that's the big run underneath the gondola. It slid twice during that 2-week period, all the way down, hitting lower towers on Chair 5. If you're familiar with that terrain, it's a long way. And then it also, I don't know if you guys are familiar skiing there. If you're familiar with the closure that we put up on the basically blocking off Sliver and Triangle, both of those runs had avalanche debris going down them. And so if you're questioning like, why did they put this avalanche closure here? That's why, because that climax will slide big sometimes. And the lower face of 5, which is a slope you don't even really even control, actually slid during this period as well. Just to say kind of how extreme the conditions were during that time. And then Abbey 3-5, that's on Lincoln Mountain. That slid very significantly twice as well. Once after control work and when it was snowing hard during the day and blowing, a gust triggered that. And it actually, a week later or less than a week later, a stick of dynamite was thrown onto that area. And before the stick even blew up, it was just the force of the stick hitting the snow released an 8-foot crown that buried the top of 16. So these warning signs that the patrol puts up are to be, this is why we put them up, and that's why people should listen to them and not cross that line, because sometimes slides go a lot bigger than anyone thinks. So this is that avalanche on Avalanche 3-5 on Lincoln Mountain. That crown was up to 8 feet tall. Fortunately, the snowboarder who triggered it wasn't hurt. He rode away. Very fortunate for sure. Then we had another accident on Lincoln Mountain. This happened on the middle of December during a big unstable period. Patrol went out to shoot this. This is basically underneath the chair line of 22. It's known as Viva and Shaft. And the top shot that they threw released about half the slope, 3 or 4 foot crown. They worked their way down, and as you can see, sort of this tower down here is where they typically throw 2 more shots to release the lower slopes. And the shot down here went off, and this, usually this is a safe spot for patrollers to stay right by this tower. But this shot triggered an avalanche that released about 400 feet above them up here. And it took both the patrollers for a slide. One pulled his airbag and ended up stopping mid-slope, luckily, but the other one ended up getting raked all the way down through these trees and pinned up against a tree. Really severely damaged his leg. It was up, basically, his leg was up behind his head, dislocated from the knee. It was pretty awful. Ski patrollers responded from the other routes, got to him within a few minutes, but it took 17 patrollers 2 hours from the time they found him in order to take him down to the bottom of the mountain. The snow conditions were just that hard to travel through. Just it's basically heave ho, move 2 inches, heave ho, move 2 more inches. And so this patroller is actually still in Davis undergoing medical care. He had some really bad tissue damage and some compartment syndrome possibilities. And so we're hoping for the best for him. If anyone feels so compelled, there's a site that you can make some donations to. We're all hoping that he'll be back on the hill someday, not too long off in the future, but it was a scary one, and one of those things that could have happened to any patroller, and he was just the one that was in that spot that day. For those of you who've skied up there in the last few weeks, you've seen these huge crowns and the paranoids, 8 foot, up to 8 foot crowns as well. These happened on December 26th, and these were some of the biggest slides that we can remember seeing up there. Ripped out all through the paranoids, all the way through Scotties and to the hump, down to those facets we were talking about again. You can see all those bare rocks showing basically almost at the ground level. For those of you familiar again with Mammoth Mountain, sorry I don't have a better map to show you, but this is the top of Chair 11, that easy beginner slope run, disco chair. That avalanche actually hit the top of Chair 11, and that red line is debris that was found over in Apple Pie, some of those beginner runs. That was all closed, of course, when they were doing this, but that's we don't see that happen very often. So I'll go back to this, to Air is Human now with a bit of season history and what happened on Mammoth Mountain. I debated a bit about what to name this presentation. First, I thought about naming it "Ignorance is Bliss" until it's not. And there's a lot of, if you go out there and you're not very experienced and don't know what avalanches are or snowpacks are, you can go out there and just not know what you're getting yourself into. My first time in the Rockies, I'm from the East Coast. I went out to Telluride to visit a friend, and they had some snowshoes hanging in the garage. I took them out and I'm just gonna go hike around, and I ended up climbing up slopes outside of town, and oh, look at that fun looking slope. I kind of snowshoed up this really steep looking slope and had no clue about avalanches. And fortunately, I didn't kill myself because no avalanches happened, but it was definitely not what I know now. And I got kind of cringe thinking about what I did, just having no clue. But the reality is these days it's not that ignorant people that are getting caught in avalanches. It's a lot of experienced people. Last year was one of the biggest fatality rates in history for avalanches across the country. And most of those avalanches weren't people who didn't know any better. It was people who had quite a bit of experience and did know about avalanches. So I didn't name it that because that's not really what we're talking about here. Here's another slide, those idiots. It's easy to be judgmental and to hear about an avalanche and be like, what the hell were they thinking being out there? And then I think it's really important to stop and ask yourself, wait a minute, maybe how could that have been me potentially? Because they're not idiots. These are smart people that are getting out there with experience, and yet they're getting caught. What can we learn from that? So the first main incident I'm going to talk about here happened in the Sherwins on December 23rd. This is the daily advisory that went out that morning at 7 a.m. There was an avalanche warning, meaning basically high avalanche danger at all elevations across the region. With 20 inches of snow overnight and continuing snowfall and high winds during the day is basically high avalanche danger everywhere, and travel in or below avalanche terrain was not recommended. That being said, you could go skiing and be safe if you stay away from avalanche terrain. Stay on slopes that are 30 degrees or less and out from under slopes that are 30 degrees and less. But that's very important, that part about staying out of avalanche terrain. So these folks wanted to go skiing still, and they knew it was high danger, so they were going to try to go ski 30-degree slopes that were in the trees, that were mellow, that weren't going to be avalanche prone. Here, and that same day, they went out earlier that morning. That same day in the afternoon, I went out in a very similar place that they went out to. And I was getting basically shooting cracks across the snow. This went like 20 feet across the snow. This is a snow pit that I dug. Extended column tests propagated and failed at just 12 taps, which is not a very many taps. Basically, just pretty heads up conditions. And here's a video of me that day. Charles Feinberg here at the Eastern Syria Avalanche Center. What happened? On safe terrain. Not underneath anything steep enough to slide because there's a lot of snow out here and it's coming down. Yeah, about 2 feet of snow, dense stuff, upside down. Dug a hole back there. It's when you take a video. But yeah, it's definitely upside down snowpack, a little more sensitive than what we're used to with the last couple storms, which came right side up. So we'll be sensitive storm slides and wind slides here for some time. Stay safe, keep the mellow terrain out from underneath these slopes, and boy, it'll be a whole new landscape here when the storm clears, maybe sometime next week. So there was no question that avalanche danger was high, conditions were unstable, but these two folks who were hoping to go out in mellow terrain around that Mammoth Rock area at the end of Sherwins, they ended up getting caught in an avalanche. Their plan was, this is a topo map here. It's shaded. The green slopes are basically stuff less than 27 degrees. The yellow is 27 to 29. The orange, and then dark orange and red, that's the most concerning, between 32 and 45 degrees. That's really the avalanche prone slopes. You can see there's a lot of green in this picture. Up here is the ridge top, so it's the high elevation, and down here is the Old Mammoth Road, the end of Old Mammoth Road. So they were going up this green terrain. This couple, they had studied their maps before they even went up there. They were looking at probably a similar map to this with shading on it, like, hey, well, there's a lot of green up there. We can keep it mellow and just stay in the green. and have a little tour and experience this new soft snow. So they were going up, and what they found is that there were some other skin tracks from earlier that day, and one of the skin tracks, well, actually the only skin track, headed up right where this red squiggly line went, and so they kept following it. It was really hard to break trail in deep new snow, so it's a whole lot easier to follow a track that's already been broken. And as they were going, they were getting up into some steeper terrain up here, and I think they were questioning themselves. They were thinking, this is getting a little steeper. I'm not so sure about this. They kept going, and right around where this dot is up here, that's when they were like, yeah, this is too steep up here. This isn't looking good. I don't feel comfortable. Let's head back down from here. And so they took their skins off, put in their skis into ski mode, and just as they're about to ski away, an avalanche came down from above and hit them both. One pulled his airbag and was able to hold on to a tree, but the other one basically just got hit from behind and went face first, getting taken down through the trees, and she ended up getting buried. I'm going to read a little what her statement was about that, because I think it's better than what I can say. 1 second. So this is what she writes. I had not made a turn yet when a large avalanche from above knocked me over suddenly headfirst into the trees. I swam and felt like it wouldn't be a significant burial, but while fighting, felt another heavy wave of snow push me further through the trees headfirst. When I was stopping, I immediately started moving my face and my body as best I could, hoping to form an escape or a face pocket. Except for my left arm, I was completely buried headfirst down the mountain. I had no idea where my partner was and started to use the left arm to dig out what seemed like a foot of snow above my head. It was becoming impossible because the snow had nowhere to go, but I knew that was the only way I was going to survive. I worked to control my breathing so I wasn't breathing in panic and wasting resources. Relief came when I could hear a voice above me, and it took a minute to figure out where my head was, but I was able to be recovered. So pretty intense experience just for like a little mellow tour out in some mellow terrain that you thought was going to be safe. Fortunately, her partner got to her within a few minutes and was able to dig her out and get her head out and save her. If he had been buried as well, or if he hadn't been there, she very likely would have been dead after this incident. So there's different things that went into play here. I think the main thing probably is the lure of the skin track, like following a skin track. You're thinking maybe first of all, if someone else is already going there, that it's safe. So you'll follow somewhere else, someone's track that already went there. And the other thing is that it's a lot easier to follow a skin track than breaking your own trail. So I think that played into a big part of where they went that day. Complex terrain. This is basically that same image. I flipped it over, so now north is facing upward and south is down. So this is the ridge line up here. This is the road down here. So if there hadn't been a skin track that day, they very well could have just been following this green zone and stayed in this green area up until here. That would have been better than where they went for sure. But there's all this, sorry about that. There's all this orange and red terrain above them. This is Mammoth Rock Bowl. And there's been times that I've seen trees broken down here in this green zone from avalanches dripping out up here. So when it's really high danger and snow is building up, even crossing down in this green zone is not a safe thing to do. That day when I went out that afternoon, I stayed really close to this bit of a ridge line here, because I knew that I've seen those trees broken from before. And I stayed in this green, and then get to this ridge line here, and ridge lines can generally be safe. So I followed this up a bit and then turned around because anywhere else you would go, you're getting underneath these steep terrain. But it's really complex, and you really need to know where you're going to be able to go out in these areas. And there's a pretty fine line between what might be safe and what might not be. These are some of the pictures of trees that were taken in, I think, 2017, 2015, when that avalanche, that rock bowl, that slope way up there released. It came down and broke this trees, and then even lower these trees down by almost near the road. So what did they do right that day? They knew the danger, so they weren't going to go ski some steep lines or something. They knew they had to play it safe. They looked at maps ahead of time and saw where the mellow terrain was and aimed to stay on that mellow terrain. And they carried the right gear. You know, one had an airbag. They had avalanche beacons and shovel and probes, everything you needed to go and be as safe as you could be. They made sure their beacons were on, because that's a common mistake as well. Carrying it isn't enough. You got to make sure that thing is on. And you need to know how to use them. So her partner didn't know how to use them to turn it on and to find her. Where was the poor decision made? Some might say it was leaving the house to go ski at all that morning. I think that's a lot of responses on Facebook. You could see that, you know, what were they doing even going out in the backcountry period? And, you know, there are places you can go that are somewhat safe if you know where you're going and you're staying on avalanche terrain. Some might say, what were they going to the Sherwins for? Like the Sherwins, there's avalanches that come off the Sherwins. That's nowhere there is safe. And that's a very legitimate call as well, because there's, you know, if you're not very careful and know where you're going, there's a lot of the Sherwins that could get you into trouble. Maybe their poor decision was to follow that skin track. And maybe not to turn around just slightly earlier. If they had turned around maybe a minute earlier or just a few feet down the slope, maybe that wouldn't have happened. It's hard to say. When avalanche danger is rising and elevated at that level, you know, everyone has different risk levels and comfort levels in different areas. So for some, definitely leaving the house is the first wrong thing to do. Others, the sure ones, and other ones were just not being really diligent about staying out of steeper slopes. So there's the technical factors, which is basically snowpack and weather and terrain. You need all three of those things combined to have an avalanche. You need the unstable snowpack, which is the new snow falling from the sky or blowing. You need that terrain. You need steep enough terrain to slide. And then finally, you have that middle piece, the human. Like avalanches can happen all they want. If humans aren't around, who really cares? It's cool to look at. So those human factors are really what gets us into trouble and what we really need to focus on and be aware of for ourselves, because we're all different. We all have different risk tolerances, but none of us wants to go and get buried by an avalanche out on a slope and potentially die. So yeah, the human going into the terrain, that's the big problem here. So to touch on the social media, the Facebook and Instagram these days, everything gets posted on social media, and there's a lot of negativity that goes on, and we're really trying to promote more of a positive culture about people sharing their accidents, and so other people can learn, and hopefully these things won't happen as much. So this actually had a lot of positive comments when this went on Facebook and Instagram. Like very close call. I'm glad they were okay. Thanks and kudos to them for sharing their story, because it's a very embarrassing, vulnerable thing to share that you made a mistake. There's a lot of judgment that happens out there. Interestingly, on Facebook, when this was posted, someone else posted that afterwards. That's like, oh, I was the first one breaking trail there that day. So this person was up there even before them, and maybe that was the skin track they were following. When a small soft slab avalanche actually hit him and took him 10 feet. So that was, you know, definitely some pretty sketchy conditions that day. But, you know, I think sharing people's stories and so other people can learn is a very important part of being out there, and hopefully helping us all be safer. So as avalanche danger rises, you know, the line between safe and dangerous becomes narrower and narrower. Like a couple of degrees on a slope from 30 degrees to 33 degrees, or just a few feet can mean the difference between getting buried in an avalanche or skiing home safely. So when avalanche danger rises or there's uncertainty, we all have to give ourselves that extra margin of error, because we're human, we all make errors. So so that was more like a direct hit that I shared there. Fortunately, they walked away from it. This other one I'm going to share was a near miss, I would say. This is in the Red Cone area. If this topo map makes any sense to you, this is the Red Cone Ridge. This is the north-facing slope up here. This is the west-facing slope. This is Lake George down here, where this is actually where you approach. Actually, this is Horseshoe. Lake George is further here. So usually people approach this going up this green terrain, and this is actually somewhere where you can, if you're cautious and know the terrain, you can stay pretty safe even during high avalanche danger to go travel up here into this ridge line and back down. But as you can see, there's definitely some red and even black zones that are steep slopes. And so this is the danger rating this day was moderate. So a lot of people think that's fairly safe. You can go out there, and if you're not trying to push it too hard, you could probably stay safe. Well, they went up here and they skied down the bowl, and then they were, instead of coming back up the bowl, they were going out and traversing around this knob. And the report called it a sort of benign terrain. And in reality, it's really actually kind of complex and not benign at all. It has these steep chutes and these steep slopes and rolls throughout this zone over here. And as they were going through here, they actually triggered an avalanche that went several hundred feet away from where they were. If you can see this picture, there's this crown over here. They were here and they triggered remotely a crown that happened over here. And you can see this line in the trees that it went a good ways. Fortunately, they weren't in the zone of where they were going to get caught, and so they were able to ski away from it. But just goes to show, you got to really be careful of even what you might think is not your main objective to ski, but those in and outs that you might take. So finally, I'm going to share one more story. This isn't from this year, and it's not even from the Sierras. This happened back in 2019 in Colorado. But there was a big investigation done and a lot of information collected about it. And I think we can all learn a good bit from it. So I think it's important thought it was important to share today. This is probably a lot of you have heard of it. This happened during an avalanche course near Silverton, Colorado. There was a group of six backcountry skiers. They were in part of an Area Level 2 course, and they were going to go out, and this is towards the end of their course, and they were making a big route basically to travel and practice their skills. The night before, they had spent several hours studying maps and plotting out their routes to avoid terrain. There was a persistent slab problem out there this time, and basically slopes that were over 32 degrees, and they were quite sketchy, and it was to be avoided. It's a different snowpack out there. This is the crown, a picture of the crown, and that red line, that red arrow is where these people entered the slope. So 6 backcountry skiers were actually caught. One was partially buried, and one was buried and killed in this accident. Here, as you can see, where they dropped in on this mellower side of the ridge on the right. They dropped in here. They couldn't see past the rollover. So the first one dropped in is actually the lead guide, the teacher, dropped in basically instructing him, so, okay, stay to my left in the mellower terrain. So he put the first track in. The next person came down probably about halfway, and the rest of them couldn't quite see, so they were sidestepping down the slope up here. When the third person basically triggered a slide that ripped out above them and carried the top few people only a little bit, but the bottom 2 got buried or taken a good ways. And then on top of that, when the avalanche reached down here, it triggered this other avalanche way up here that came down and actually buried one of those people, and that's what the fatality came from. So here's a better picture of those slides. This one was the one that they triggered at first, and this other secondary one was sympathetically triggered. And this yellow one, actually, that happened when, yes?
You can't see your mouse.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. If you can, so there's the one on the right. That's the one that first was triggered, and the one on the left, that other red circle, was the sympathetically triggered avalanche after the first one went. And that yellow one actually was used during the rescue efforts a day later. They bombed that slope so they could get in there safely and recover the body of the person that was caught. So this is what they were doing before the trip. They planned this route, basically starting off on the lower right, to basically avoid all that red. They were really diligent in plotting their route and staying out of avalanche terrain. And all the way up to the right, up to the top left rather, you could see they sort of threaded the needle there between these yellow patches and orange patches. And so they're like, oh, we'll thread the needle. We can be cautious and just thread the needle there and make it safely and make it around. And obviously you can see that it wasn't quite safe enough, that they were actually in terrain that was steeper than what the snap showed. Here's another depiction of that. The green track is the up track and the blue is the down. So their green track is going through safe terrain, and then their blue is basically trying to thread the needle, as I was saying, through those steeper slopes. So CalTopo, if you guys are familiar with that, that's a mapping software you can use that you can overlay these colors on, so you can see the slope thicknesses. Gaia also has that. So this one on the left is the CalTopo depiction of that. Basically, that orange, 27 to 29 degrees. That yellow rather, 27 to 29 degrees. They were figuring, hey, we could stay in the yellow, stay out of the orange, and keep it safe. The one on the right is actual LiDAR radar that basically plotted out that slope and shows actually what the slope thicknesses were in that area. And you can see the discrepancy there, that there's actually quite a bit of orange and red in that zone that appeared yellow on the CalTopo map. And that's because it's basically an average that the CalTopo shows you, the slopes angles. And so basically it shows you how important it is to use these mapping tools, these digital mapping tools as a good tool, but you can't rely on them solely. You really have to open your eyes when you're out in the field and realize that they're just an estimation and that there's variations that exist. And so once you're out there, to get out your inclinometer and really measure those slope angles and not just rely on a map. So that's the main things I wanted to share. I want to thank the people that reported those accidents so that we could all learn from them. And I also want to say that, I've been in my own accidents, and it's a hard thing to do, but I think it's important to share. I've lost a dear friend in 2006 when I was buried in an avalanche, and she did not make it out. I think that basically started my interest in avalanche education and then learning and hopefully promoting others to be safer. And I still, there's still mistakes I make out there. I'm supposedly one of the experts, but the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And the more I realize, my own tendencies are, and to realize that I've got to be, on the ball and really paying attention to what's going on out there. And I do make mistakes too. So as I said, like when avalanche danger arises, you got to give yourself that bigger margin of error. Just don't think you're going to ride that line so closely. You really think you got to basically assume that you're going to make a mistake. And so give yourself that cushion so that it doesn't result in some kind of disaster. So that's what I have for you. Is there any questions out there? Yeah.
I couldn't figure out where red cone slid.
Red cone.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out on the map.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, my mouse you couldn't see. I'll try to describe it better there. So the red cone slope, that's that kind of a smiley face, orange and red there. If you follow that slope up to the right, that goes diagonally up to the right, there's a ridge line, that ridge line with there's a little bit of black in there that kind of curves around. So it's actually above to the north of the bowl proper. That's where it slid, up in that zone up there. If you can see this picture up on the right, that's looking back up at Red Cone Bowl proper. And it's basically, most of the bowl is up to the left where it's just out of sight. But so if you're looking up at the bowl and you're down in those trees where that crown happened there. Does that make any more sense? So it wasn't the actual bowl that slid, it was in that terrain that, you might not be so concerned about. Any other questions out there? Yeah, anyone in mind? Well, thank you guys very much, and apologize for technical difficulties. And Joe?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the Eastern Sierra Avalanche Center. We're so lucky to have them in this area. Thanks to Josh Feinberg and Mitchell for coming down. And yeah, I just wanted to, like I said, when did you guys start? What year was it?
The Avalanche, boy, in 2000, probably 4, I think we started.
2004. Yeah, no, honestly, yeah, we're so privileged to have this kind of a nonprofit to this kind of work in this area, and so I think it's they're always welcome to come here, obviously, and yeah, let's go around to Josh and Rachel for coming out.
And thanks so much, Joe, for all your support over the years and hosting us. We really appreciate that.